anything to the outside world until 10 minutes after it has been said or displayed. These are important requirements which are subject to the Chair's ruling and a restriction order. The Chair may also make further restriction orders during the course of evidence. Breach of such orders is a criminal offence. Thank you. For those viewing in the annex, you will not receive any information until the 10-minute period has elapsed, so you may transmit information as soon as you see it. No food or drink may be consumed in the hearing room except for the water provided. Those people seated in the public gallery may not cross into the legal team area. If there is a need to pass a message to anyone in that area, please write a note and give it to one of the ushers who will deliver it for you. The usual sitting times for the inquiry are 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. each day. Lunch will be approximately 12:45 to 1:45. There will be short breaks mid-morning and mid-afternoon. Please wear your lanyards and passes at all times within the building, and note that if you leave the secure area of the building, these will need to be handed back. On re-entry, you will have to undergo a further security search, so time will be limited. Also, please remember that those viewing proceedings in the annex will still have 10 minutes of the hearings to go when we finish. So please try to be quiet in the entrance lobby when you leave. Our ushers are here to help you, so please ask one of them if you have any questions. Some of the evidence to be heard in this inquiry may be upsetting. We have volunteers from the Coroner's Court Support Service who are available for confidential discussions if anyone is affected by anything said or shown during these proceedings. Perhaps the support workers would indicate who they are at the back there. Thank you. We will be moving to a level 2 evidence later today, probably over lunch break. Under level 2, the public gallery will be closed, and only a few accredited journalists will be allowed into the hearing room whilst evidence is being given. Everyone else will be able to view proceedings in the annex, subject to the 10-minute delay. No one, whether a member of a legal team, an accredited journalist, or members of the inquiry staff or contractors, will be permitted to bring electronic devices into the hearing room. This includes mobile phones and smartwatches, even if switched off. This is a direction of the Chair, and breach of this direction is a criminal offence. The inquiry security team will be able to arrange safe storage of any such devices during level 2 hearings. Please ask at the security desk. And please remember to allow sufficient time to arrange safe storage for your devices before the start of proceedings. It can get very busy just before we restart, and we do not wish to have the proceedings delayed. Thank you very much. Could somebody bring the witness to the witness box, please?
No.
No?
Not necessary, thank you.
Oh, okay, I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
So, good morning. We will start this morning with reading a witness statement in circumstances that I will explain.
Right.
So you will recall the evidence of Sergeant McCurley and Inspector Beresford Smith.
I do.
That they both gave evidence on Friday the 18th of October, which was the last day that we sat in Salisbury. As I'm sure you will recall, they both gave evidence about events on the 30th of June and their attendance at 9 Muggleton Road. They both also referred to a detective sergeant who had attended Salisbury District Hospital that evening. That individual was, as she then was, Detective Sergeant Kerry Laws. Temporary Superintendent Laws, as she now is, has provided the inquiry with a statement, and we had intended to call her to give evidence this morning.
Yes.
With another police officer, Erin Martin, who undertook some related inquiries also in the days following the poisoning. And this afternoon, we shall hear from Dr. Jukes, with whom both of those two officers dealt on the 30th of June and in the days that followed. Last week, however, the inquiry was provided with medical evidence to the effect that Kerry Laws was not fit to give evidence today. You took the decision that she should be removed as a live witness from today's witness list, and that her statement should be read today because it relates, as I've said, to the evidence that we shall hear later from Erin Martin and Dr. Jukes. You have also now taken the decision that, in light of her ongoing medical condition, Kerry Laws will not give oral evidence to the inquiry at all. However, those representing the family have submitted a list of written questions for her,
Yes.
and the inquiry intends to ask her to provide a further written statement responding to those questions insofar, sir, as you deem it appropriate, and as long as she is fit to do so.
Yes, well, I agree. I understood that to be the position. It's a shame that she's really quite ill, but she can't give evidence, and that's the only proper course to take. I take it nobody has any other observations to make.
No, thanks.
Thank you very much.
So with that in mind, I will read most of Ms. Law's statement now. If we
Yes.
could have it on screen, please. It's INQ 006105. So for the record, it's not in fact dated or signed, but we have been told that Ms. Laws has read it and approved it. Before I start reading, so the final thing I'll mention is that as I read, I will take you to at least some of the documents to which she refers in the course of the statement.
Oh, yes, please.
So I shall start at the beginning. I am a serving member of Wiltshire Police in the rank of Temporary Superintendent, head of the Professional Standards Department. I joined Wiltshire Police in October 2000 and undertook uniform roles in incident response and neighbourhood community policing. I was promoted to Sergeant in 2005 and performed the same roles along with that of volume crime. In September 2012, I successfully completed my initial crime investigation development programme, detective training, and then joined the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, at Salisbury. In September 2014, I moved into the role of Custody Support Sergeant, covering Melksham and Swindon. I remained in this position until 2016, when I moved into the Crime Standards and Justice Department. In May 2017, I returned to CID Salisbury, where I remained until January 2020, when I was promoted to Detective Inspector in the Professional Standards Department, PSD. In March 2021, I attended and successfully completed my Senior Detective Training Programme. From July 2022 through to May 2024, I was promoted to Detective Chief Inspector in the Crime Standards and Justice Department, and in May 2024, I was appointed to my current position. This statement will outline my involvement in the police response to the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess and Charles Rowley in June 2018. This investigation was named Operation Fortis by Wiltshire Police. At this point in time, I was a detective sergeant within Salisbury CID, and this is the first statement that I've provided in relation to this particular incident. However, I will also detail my minor involvement in the investigation into the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in March of that year, known as Operation Fairline. So at paragraphs 4 and 5, of the statement, Ms Laws refers to a number of documents that she has relied on. I'm not going to read out those paragraphs, but as I've said, I will take you to a few of those documents as we go through the statement.
Right.
So paragraphs 6 and 7, as you can see, Ms Laws does, as she had said in the part I read a moment ago, she refers to a very minor involvement in the investigation following the Skripal poisoning, and I won't read those paragraphs either. So I will pick it up.
Except to say, you better record it, Mr. O'Connor. She was no more involved than making a list of people who were about the place at the time.
Indeed, sir.
Right.
More or less administrative role.
Yep.
So I will pick it up at paragraph 8, where Ms Laws commences her narrative of the events of June 2018. So on Saturday, the 30th of June 2018, I was working an evening shift, 1600 to 0100 hours, as duty detective sergeant in Salisbury, with responsible for the south of the county, which included Amesbury. I can say from notes I made at the time, at KL1, that at 18:05 hours that evening, I had just returned to the temporary police office situated at the Five Rivers Leisure Complex, Salisbury. Habitually, when I'm in the office, I would monitor my police radio and scan police incident logs for incidents that may require CID assistance or oversight via my laptop computer. I do this because not all incidents are brought to CID attention by the Communications Centre. I do not now recall how the incident known as Operation Fortis came to my attention that evening. It could have been the reports coming over the radio, or it may have been as a result of scanning the incident log.
Can we just make sure that I've got the timeline in my head, Mr. O'Connor? This is the Saturday the 30th. We're at Muggleton Road, or we're concerned with events at Muggleton Road, not, so far as this witness is concerned, so far as I can see, with the collapse of Miss Sturgess in the morning, or her admission to hospital, but with the later events involving Mr. Rowley, which had resulted in the ambulance getting to him around 7:15 that evening.
That's right, sir. Of course, by the time we're talking about, so 6 o'clock or so, Dawn Sturgess was already in hospital.
She was.
And the events that we've heard from other witnesses were ongoing at Muggleton Road.
Right.
So you're exactly right, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. That's a help.
Just give me a moment, sir. Yes, so I'll pick it up halfway through paragraph 10 where I'd got to. Either way, I made a note in my daybook of the log number, the location of the incident, and brief details of the available information. For clarity, the incident log number was 245 of that date, and the address was 9 Muggleton Road, Amesbury, SP4 7GY. The incident was initially classified on the log as a hazmat incident, brackets hazardous material.
Which had been applied to it by the ambulance people, Mr. Channon particularly,
As we have heard.
who we heard from in the past.
Indeed.
Right.
The information from the incident log indicated that a female, whose identity at that point was unconfirmed, had been in respiratory arrest at the premises earlier that day. A male named Charles Rowley, and possibly 2 further persons at the same address, had now been taken ill. The information in the log, and coming over the radio, led me to conclude that this was potentially an incident that required CID involvement and potentially oversight. This was because there were potentially 3 or 4 persons from the same address who had all apparently become ill in a short time period for reasons as yet unknown. Additionally, the other services were now of the opinion that symptoms being presented at the scene were similar to the previous nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury, Operation Fairline. I remember that I then conducted checks on the police information systems available to me by way of my laptop. These were in relation to the name Charles Rowley and the address of 9 Muggleton Road, Amesbury, Charles Rowley was not a name or individual that was known to me at that point in time, nor was the address. These checks revealed that the named individual was well known to Wiltshire Police, with recent intelligence regarding Charles Rowley's involvement with drugs. I recorded this information contemporaneously in my notebook. This was not the full information, but was and I think the word is intended to be précis, to aid my thought processes. This information caused me to consider the following factors. A. Was this a drug overdose? B. Due to there being 3 or 4 people apparently affected, had the drugs been mixed with something? C. Was fentanyl a factor? Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, which I was aware had been making an appearance in the county at around that time. D. Was this a poisoning incident of some kind? E. Was this another nerve agent poisoning? This was, however, at the bottom of my list, due to the fact that I could see no connection to the previous Salisbury incident, as the circumstances were very different, in that the previous incident was a targeted attack on a specific individual. The protection of public health was also at the centre of my thinking, because it appeared 3 or 4 people had fallen ill for reasons as yet unknown. I now decided that I should attend the hospital to establish the circumstances surrounding the admission of the earlier female casualty. I can say from my notes that I left the office to attend Salisbury District Hospital at 19:33 hours in company with then temporary Detective Constable 2269 Barrett. I updated the communication centre of my decision to attend via my radio. My rationale for attending the hospital and not the scene of the incident was twofold. Firstly, because there were officers directed to attend the scene and cordons being placed by the other services, leading me to conclude that the scene was under control or soon would be. And secondly, as there was no one at the hospital and we had a knowledge gap in relation to the circumstances of the earlier female's admission, status and current treatment. I don't think that I was aware of the female's identity at that point in time, and in any event, I would have needed to be sure of it. The hospital staff treating her were the only people able to provide the full details at this stage. I can also say from my notes that Temporary Detective Constable Barrett and I arrived at the hospital at 19:45 hours and asked to speak to staff involved in the care and treatment of the female brought in from 9 Muggleton Road, Amesbury, earlier that day. I do not remember who it was we spoke to initially. We ascertained that the female was being treated in Radnor Ward, and I remember that we were taken into a side room allocated to staff. We then spoke with an anaesthetist whose name I recorded in my notes only as Mandy. I cannot remember who told us specifically, but they identified the female as being Dawn Kelly Sturgess, born 18th of the 6th, 1974, from an address of John Baker House in Salisbury. I made a note of these specific details in my book. Staff further informed us that Dawn Sturgess had arrested at 10:11 hours that morning at 9 Muggleton Road. By this, I knew that they meant that she had suffered a cardiac arrest. In my notes, I recorded her time of arrival at the hospital by ambulance as being 11:45 query. At that time, Dawn's condition was described by the hospital as being ventilated and stable. I did not see Dawn at any stage and made a record of her condition in my notes. We were introduced in the staff room to Dr. Stephen Dukes, who was the duty consultant in charge of Dawn's care. I remember that we had a discussion with Dr. Dukes about Charlie Rowley, who was expected to be admitted to the hospital imminently. We agreed that it was worrying that we had further patients, or patient bracket S, from the same address. We went on to have a long conversation about the circumstances of this incident. I made a short, again, précis of the relevant parts in my notes as follows. On arrival, Dawn had presented as not foaming at the mouth. It was spittle at most. She had small pupils and no sweats. Dr. Jukes also stated that he had been involved in the initial treatment of the Scripples from the Salisbury incident, and his opinion was that if these circumstances had arisen prior to that incident, he would have thought that this was a drug overdose. And so, just pausing there, there have been a number of references in the statement to Ms. Laws's notebook. It has been transcribed for our purposes. If I could ask that it be brought up on screen, it's INQ 006143. As I say, it's been typed out, but just for example, if you look just below the first redaction, where there's a reference to police intelligence, in some of the paragraphs I read a moment ago, we can see the timing, 1933, going to Salisbury District Hospital, and just casting our eyes down further, details that we've heard mentioned about the timing of the cardiac arrest.
Yeah, she's put a question mark by the arrival time at the hospital, and
Yes.
that's in her witness statements as well, isn't it?
It was, sir, yes. And in particular, I just read the reference to her conversation with Dr. Jukes.
Yeah.
And you see the two lines. The first one, if reported prior to incident, would have thought DROD,
Yeah.
drugs overdose, and then not foaming at mouth, spittle at most, SML, small pupils, no sweat. So, as I said, so there are a number of references in the statement to the notebook that invite. At any rate, there it is, and there are some of the references that we've heard of.
Right.
So I'll go back to the statement, if I may, and pick it up at paragraph 18. During these conversations, I took the decision that I needed to pass the recent drug intelligence relating to Charles Rowley to Dr. Jukes. I passed him brief information I had read previously and as recorded in my notes. I don't remember precisely where in our conversation I did this, but I'm sure it was in the early stages. I advised him of the recent police intelligence regarding Charles Rowley's involvement with drugs. I provided this information to Dr. Jukes as my overriding concern at the time was that this information could be critical in saving the lives of both Dawn and Charles, together with anyone else who may have been involved. I recorded this fact in my notes. My further rationale for doing this was to ensure that the medical professionals had all the information in my possession to inform their decision-making in their treatment of Dawn and Charlie, together with anyone else who may yet become ill. Believing time to be of the essence, I didn't know if the withholding of this information may negatively affect any treatment options available. I'm not medically trained and I don't have much experience of drugs. My principal duty is the preservation of life. After speaking with Dr. Jukes, I instigated a radio communication with Acting Sergeant Ian McCurley, who was the supervisor on scene at 9 Muggleton Road. I made a note of this in my book against his collar number of D638. Or it might be 0638, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I wanted an update from the scene, re the condition of Charles Rowley, the possible third patient, and anything else that may assist in the identification of what we were dealing with. I was informed that the identity of the possible third person was Sam Hobson and that he was in good health. Charles Rowley was shortly to be taken to the hospital by ambulance and that items in the address were potentially suggestive of drug use. The latter related to needles being seen in the bedroom and a sharps box, as well as other items elsewhere. I again made brief notes about this conversation in my book. I can say from the incident log and from my notes made at the time that I requested an intelligence check on Dawn Sturgess via my police radio timed at 2010 hours. A result was passed back to me immediately, which included details from the police national computer and contained Class A drug-related intelligence linked to herself and Charlie Rowley. I again made a brief note in my book. I then attempted to update the Force Incident Manager, FIM, Inspector Andrew Noble, by radio, but was unable due to poor radio reception. My notes indicated that I then updated him via telephone. I informed him that at this stage the hospital were treating Dawn for a potential drug overdose whilst retaining an open mind re any other potential cause. Following this, I continued conversations with Dr. Dukes and I requested for blood tests to be carried out to confirm if their illness was due to an overdose or something else, such as nerve agent. It was normal practice to request blood work. Dr. Dukes stated to me that Dawn's symptoms were not symptomatic of a pesticide overdose or other poison. The symptoms are fitting with an overdose of opiates and will treat symptomatically as such. With regard to the request for blood tests, he stated that they had a machine to test for nerve agent following the Salisbury incident, which unfortunately wasn't working due to battery issues. I noted in my book that she hadn't been tested for drugs in her system at that point in time, but I cannot now remember why this was. I can say from the instant log data that at 20:24 hours that evening, I communicated an update to the communication centre via my radio, in which I confirmed that the suspected cause of Dawn's illness appeared to be a drug overdose, and that the hospital was satisfied that this was the case. I went on to state that I was remaining at the hospital awaiting the outcome of drugs tests. However, I subsequently discovered that the results wouldn't be available that evening. At approximately 20:45 hours, and following my conversation with Dr. Dukes, I radioed APS McCurley, who was still at Muggleton Road. I gave him a further update on the information provided by the hospital, stating that it appeared to be a drug-related incident, that we were about to leave, and that we would await any further developments from the hospital. I would also add at this point that I remember having a subsequent conversation with Acting Sergeant McCurley at some stage regarding the need to conduct a more detailed search of the premises. The reason for this was to look for any evidence of any controlled or prescribed drugs or anything else that may have caused Dawn or Charles to become unwell. I then requested a radio conversation with the communications centre, as shown in the instant log timed at 20:49 hours. They returned the call at 20:55 hours, and I updated them with the current situation, this being that we had spoken to Dr. Dukes, the consultant treating Dawn Sturgess, who was satisfied that the symptoms Dawn was presenting were in line with a drugs overdose and that there was no risk of death. At 20:55 hours, TDC Barrett and I left the hospital and returned to a local police station, arriving at 21:05 hours, where, amongst other clerical tasks, I prepared the, quote, South and East CID handover document dated the 30th of June 2018. This is my document KL2. By way of explanation, this document is completed by the duty CID sergeant at the conclusion of each evening shift and is circulated via email to inform the following day's staff of any incident of note that has occurred in the previous 24 hours. Its purpose is to highlight any further actions that need to be taken with regard to ongoing inquiries. In this particular handover document, I outlined the circumstances of the Muggleton Road incident and my further inquiries at the hospital. I ended the report with the comment, "No further CID action at this time." By this, I meant that we had two individuals being treated at hospital who at the time were in a stable condition, with no suggestion that this was likely to change. Although I cannot remember how, I was by now aware that Charles Rowley was also in a stable condition in hospital, and that a more detailed search of the scene had now been carried out, with nothing being found which assisted with our understanding of the cause of the casualties' illnesses. There were no further inquiries outstanding for the day shift CID sergeant to complete. All this meant that I was now content to go off duty, knowing that there was nothing more for me to do at that time. At 00:59 on Sunday the 1st of July 2018, I circulated the handover report via the Wiltshire Police internal email system to a number of Wiltshire Police staff before going off duty. So just pausing there, we've heard Ms Laws referring to her handover email.
Yes.
And if we can go, please, to INQ 006146. This is the document to which she was referring. If you look at the very top, underneath the list of recipients, you can see that it was sent, as she has just said, after midnight on the 1st of July. And the text of the update is as Ms Laws describes in her statement.
So that takes us to 1 o'clock on Saturday night, Sunday morning.
Very early on the Sunday morning, yes, sir. And you can see there's the redacted reference to drugs intelligence, and then at the very end of the text, as Ms Laws said, no further CID action at this time. So that is Ms Laws clocking off very early on the Sunday morning. So if we go back to the statement, and picking it up again at paragraph 27, and there's a heading, the 1st of July, which, as we've just said, is the Sunday. Ms Laws states, I returned to duty at 1400 hours. Normal practice is that the off-going duty detective sergeant would brief the oncoming supervisor either personally or via radio. Again, this would cover incidents during their shift and any inquiries ongoing. As far as I remember, there had been no further communication from the hospital regarding the position with Dawn Sturgess and Charles Rowley. Similarly, the day shift had not had any reason to make further contact with the hospital. I'm certain that upon taking over, I would have tasked my colleague, TDC Richard Barrett, to make a follow-up inquiry with the hospital on the condition of these patients. However, I'm unable to say if this happened or not. At 22:07 hours that evening, I received an email from TDC Richard Barrett forwarding me an email he had received from William House, a Wiltshire Police staff member, who at the time was a member of the Crime Recording Team 4 at police headquarters in Devizes. The email was timed at 18:35 on the 1st of the 7th, 2018. It was apparent from that email that William House had received a telephone call from Dr. Stephen Dukes earlier that evening, and it included within an extract from that telephone conversation. It stated that Steve has advised that the patient's symptoms are not entirely consistent with a simple opioid overdose, and that they suspect organophosphate pesticide poisoning. While organophosphate is no longer used as a pesticide, Steve noted that it is possible that it was mixed with drugs taken by the patients. The treatment is similar to that for nerve agent poisoning. The female is not improving and the male has deteriorated. He is currently on a ventilator. Having viewed notes made by my colleague, TDC Richard Barrett, I'm able to say that having read the email, I requested TDC Barrett to make contact with Dr. Dukes to obtain further information about the situation, although I have no current recollection of our conversation. From memory, at the time of this conversation, we were both engaged in clerical duties at the police station and conversed personally about these developments. I know that TDC Barrett then placed a call to the hospital, but Dr. Dukes was busy with a patient, so it was arranged for the doctor to return the call. In the meantime, I decided that I needed to inform the coroner's office of the circumstances of the incident overall and of the deterioration in the health of Charles Rowley, together with the fact that the condition of Dawn Sturgess was not improving. These considerations were based on the contents of the email from William House and my concern that one or both of these patients may die. The email to the coroner's office is timed 22:19 on Sunday the 1st of July 2018. It was entitled Overdose and contained the incident log number. So pausing there, If we could go, please, to document INQ 005044. And if we could go first to page 3 of that document, I see it's on screen. So this is the email to which Ms. Laws has just referred in the part of the statement I've just read. You can see at the top it was indeed sent on Sunday the 1st of July at 22:19.
Yep.
And she mentions the title of the overdose being overdose. Sorry, the title of the email being overdose. And we will come in a moment, but if we just ask you to note for now, in the first substantive paragraph, there is a reference to ambulance and fire panicking somewhat.
Well, it begins, report of a possible second Operation Fairline.
Yes,
That's Salisbury, is it?
that indeed.
Yeah.
And then just scrolling down, so to the 7th paragraph, this will also be picked up in Ms. Law's statement. You see the paragraph starting, Stephen Dukes has contacted police this evening to state he believes there is an organophosphate element to this overdose, i.e. pesticide involvement. My view is that this is still an OD. There is no suggestion of any third-party involvement from officers who attended the scene. These are two well-known drug addicts. And then a redacted section of drugs intelligence. My consideration is that it has been out with a material which in conjunction, cut with a material which in conjunction with the drug has caused this overdose. And if we can then just go back a page to page 2 of this document. So you will see there the initial email received by Detective Barrett from William House that Ms. Laws referred to slightly earlier, saying that he'd received a call from Mr. Dukes, or Dr. Dukes rather. And just above that we can see, as Ms. Laws said, that Detective Barrett then forwarded it on to her. And in fact, at the very top of the page, what we can see is then that set of emails being forwarded on to the coroner's officer a minute or so after the email we've just looked at was sent to them. That makes sense. So if we can go back, please, to Ms. Law's statement, at paragraph 30. In the initial line of this report, and she's referring to the email we've just looked at, sir, I have stated that, quote, ambulance and fire panicked somewhat. This was an unprofessional comment to make, and I would like to take this opportunity to apologise for it. As stated, I did not attend the scene and can only say that I was most likely influenced in making this comment by what I was being told by those at the scene and comment being placed on the incident log. At the time of writing this email, I remained of the view that the cause of the patient's illness was related to the use of controlled drugs. My belief that this was a drugs-related incident was formed from the intelligence about Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess, of which I was provided and or gained access to, together with the information that I was given regarding drugs-related items being found at 9 Muggleton Road, and by the initial diagnosis of the consultant in charge of their care, and who, to my mind, now considered that there could be an organophosphate pesticide element to their condition, possibly caused by them taking contaminated drugs. Therefore, my understanding at this stage was that this was still being treated by the hospital as a suspected drugs overdose with an organophosphate involvement. In this report, she means her email, I also made the comment that the patients were, quote, two well-known drug addicts. I would like to take this opportunity to clarify these remarks. I did not know Dawn Sturgess, and my knowledge of her at this stage was limited to that I had been passed in my intelligence request to the communications centre. Based on my assessment of this intelligence and the information passed to me from the scene, I believed that both patients were involved with illegal drugs. However, I now know that there is no intelligence to support the contention that Dawn Sturgess was herself a user of illegal drugs or an addict. Therefore, I would also like to take this opportunity to personally and sincerely apologise for any distress that may have been caused to Dawn's family and friends in the making of this comment. I also mentioned in this email that I had attached an extract about organophosphates. This extract is not shown on the copy document I have viewed to assist with completion of my statement. Although I cannot now recall the exact content of the extract, I do recall that I obtained it by simply typing organophosphates into an internet search engine, which I then copied and attached to my email. At 22:23 hours that evening, I received an email from PC Richard Boston, who was one of the officers in initial attendance at Muggleton Road. The title of the email was Charles Rowley and Dawn Sturgess, and contained details of the information he had submitted into the niche intelligence database under the reference 541-800-60149 regarding the circumstances of police attendance at 9 Muggleton Road. This report contained a sentence which reinforced my thinking at the time that this was a drug overdose. It stated that there was significant evidence of Class A drug use in the premises. At about this time, I recall that my colleague TDC Barrett received an incoming call from Dr. Dukes. At approximately 2300 hours, TDC Barrett briefed me with the latest medical position. I then incorporated the salient points from this briefing into my email titled CID Handover Report, timed and dated 23/21, 1st of July 2018. This email was circulated to oncoming CID supervisors and colleagues. In brief, it stated that the patient's symptoms were not entirely consistent with a simple opioid overdose, and that the hospital now suspected organophosphate pesticide poisoning. Effectively, the doctor was saying that the drug had been cut with a pesticide, and therefore they were treating for pesticide poisoning as well. The treatment is the same as that used for the previous Salisbury nerve agent attack. I added that there was no evidence to suggest this was anything but an overdose, potentially cut with pesticides at this stage. I also mentioned that the situation of others presenting at hospital with similar symptoms would need to be monitored, although at the time of completing my handover, none had. In this email, I made mention that organophosphate traces had been found in the blood samples of both patients, but I cannot recall where I got this information from or find a record of it in any of my referred to documents. Within this handover report, I also commented on the condition of Dawn Sturgess, who was deteriorating and may have a brain injury due to suffering a cardiac arrest the previous day. With regard to Charles Rowley, he was on a ventilator and his condition had also deteriorated, though he was more likely to recover than Dawn Sturgess. I requested that further contact be made with the hospital to monitor the condition of these patients over the subsequent 2 days when I was not scheduled to be on duty. At 0006 hours on Monday the 2nd of July, and having mistakenly omitted the coroner's officer from the mailing list, I forwarded the CID email handover document discussed at paragraphs 35 and 36 to the coroner's office. And so, pausing there, Ms. Laws has just been describing her handover note at the end of that night, so on the Sunday, late on the Sunday night. And if we can go back to the same document we were looking at previously, it's INQ 005044. And on this occasion, if we can go to page 4 of that document. So this is the email or the emails to which Ms. Laws was just referring. Well, one sees at the top of that page as Ms Law said, her forwarding it on to the coroner's office just after midnight, as she said, and the main substantive email, which she had sent half an hour or so earlier to all the other addressees just below it. So I'm going to come back to this email with the next witness, so I won't go through it in
All right.
detail now. Ms Laws has summarised its contents in the statement that I've just read.
Yes.
So if we can go back to the statement, please, for the final section, picking it up at paragraph 38. At the conclusion of my shift, I had 2 days off and didn't return to work until Wednesday the 4th of July. However, on either Monday the 2nd of July or Tuesday the 3rd of July, I cannot remember which, I was contacted by DS Erin Martin to ask where the keys to 9 Muggleton Road were. She also informed me that the 9 Muggleton Road incident was now being treated as a possible nerve agent poisoning, and a senior officer strategy group, or a gold group, was being set up. Yet I was not requested, nor was it required, that I return to work at that stage. 4th of July 2018. I returned to work at 1500 hours on Wednesday the 4th of July. At some point during my shift, I learnt that a criminal investigation into the Amesbury incident was now being led by counter-terrorism police. I was not at this time, however, officially informed that the reason for this was that Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley's condition was now believed to be as a result of nerve agent poisoning. At 1740 hours, and whilst at Five Rivers Leisure Centre, I was tasked by DS Erin Martin to conduct a debrief of those police staff who had attended Muggleton Road on Saturday the 30th of June. The debrief was to consist of the completion by each of those staff members of a 2-page questionnaire, the question set having been provided to me by Detective Sergeant Martin. I conducted the debrief process with the assistance of DC Jem Horner at Amesbury Police Station between 1820 hours and 1920 hours, PC Stephen Porter, PC Richard Boston, and Acting Police Sergeant Ian McCurley attended in person, and SPC Salah El-Khadi was unable to attend, and I therefore spoke with him by telephone from a local police station between 1946 and 1956 hours. On completion of the questionnaire debrief, I was further tasked to speak with the parents of Dawn Sturgess. The purpose was to inform them that a family liaison officer, FLO, was to be appointed and to obtain contact details for both to assist the FLOs in making the initial contact. At 22:40 hours that evening, I met with Stephen Sturgess, father of Dawn, who was present with other family members, and informed him that a FLO was to be appointed to the family and obtained his contact details to pass to the FLO. Mr. Sturgess expressed disappointment that this was the first contact he'd received from the police, and although I was unaware of the reason for any delay, I apologised on behalf of Wiltshire Police for this. He mentioned that at 1500 hours that afternoon, he'd been contacted by a member of staff from Salisbury District Hospital, who informed him that the hospital now believed that Dawn had been poisoned with Novichok. He did not identify who that staff member was. I recall that this came as a shock to me. I had not at that time been officially told that it was now confirmed as a suspected Novichok poisoning. If I had been made aware of this fact, I could have informed those officers who I had spoken with only a few hours earlier when completing their questionnaires. Instead, I had not been able to pass on information to officers who may have been contaminated and who might have required urgent testing or treatment. 8th of July 2018. My next and final involvement in this incident was on the 8th of July 2018, when, following the death of Dawn, I completed the sudden death report, Form 65, recording her suspected cause of death as nerve agent Novichok involvement with medical issues. And so, for the record, if we could have up on screen, please, INQ 006144. So this is the first page of that document. And if we could just go through it, please, onto the next page. You see some further sort of formal requirements. And if we can go to the third page, this is where the details are completed. And it's at the very bottom of that page, so the last line, in fact, you see the entry on the left, believed cause of death. And then, as Ms. Laws mentions, she has completed nerve agent Novichok involvement with medical issues.
And we've got to Sunday the 8th, the week after.
It's the 8th of July.
8 days after the events.
Yes.
Yep.
And just for completeness, if we go over to the final page, you'll see there's a box asking for the circumstances of how the body was found and known last movements. And DS Laws has completed on Saturday the 30th of June 2018. Dawn Sturgess fell ill at 9 Muggleton Road, Amesbury, the home address of her partner, Charlie Rowley. Paramedics attended at 10:11 hours when she suffered a cardiac arrest. She was taken to Salisbury District Hospital and placed into the intensive care unit, where tests later revealed she had Novichok nerve agent within her blood.
Yeah.
And the box just below that, a reference to the fact that by that stage, counter-terrorism police are carrying out an investigation and treating this as murder. Her partner, Charlie Rowley, remains critical at the hospital.
Thank you. It probably doesn't matter, but the timing given at 10:11 is not actually quite accurate, is it?
It's not quite so, no. So for finally, if we could just go back to the statement, the last substantive paragraph, paragraph 45, reads as follows. Finally, although I accept and have apologised for any errors on my part, I would like to make it clear that I always acted in good faith in what I thought was the best interests of the individuals concerned and based on the information presented to me at the time. Between the commencement of the Salisbury incident on Sunday the 4th of March 2018 and the Amesbury incident on Saturday the 30th of June 2018, I received no formal or informal training from Wiltshire Police as to what signs and symptoms I should be looking for should I attend another potential nerve agent incident, and what my initial action should be if I suspected it was such an incident. I do recall at some point a global email communication with regards to double gloving and double bagging exhibits for safety reasons. And so that concludes the statement of Ms. Laws.
Thank you.
And so may we now call a live witness, Erin Martin.
Thank you.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly,
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Do sit down, speak to the microphones if you would.
Thank you, sir.
Could you give your full name, please?
Good morning. Detective Inspector Erin Martin.
Inspector Martin, thank you for coming. I'm going to spend the next hour or so asking you questions about events some time ago on the Monday, the 2nd of July 2018 and Tuesday, the 3rd of July. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you.
And in that regard, you provided a witness statement to the inquiry, have you not?
I have.
It's dated the 24th of October this year. If we could have it on screen, please. Thank you. That's the first page. If we could go through to just have on screen the last page, please. It's page 9, I believe. It's concealed on the screen for data protection reasons, but you have signed that statement.
I can confirm that I've signed that statement.
And more importantly, have you had a chance to review it before you've come to give evidence today?
Yes, thank you.
And are the contents of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Martin, just answer the questions as best you can. you can use that to remind yourself of anything that you need to, though of course you're not held by and bound by it.
Thank you.
All right?
Thank you, sir.
So I'd formally request that we adduce the entirety of that statement into
Yes,
evidence
please.
in the normal way. Before I ask you any more detailed questions, Inspector, it's notable that the statement is dated only a few weeks ago. We are talking about events that happened more than 6 years ago. Can you give us an idea of how much you can still remember about those events, the extent to which you're reliant on contemporaneous documents?
Yes. Obviously, this is the first statement that I've given since the events happened 6 years ago. So precise details around conversations, I'm not able to give precise wordings. However, I am able to give an appraisal of the conversations that I've had, and I've been able to use documents provided to me, such as handover documents that we've already seen, that have enabled me to recall the events that happened at the time.
You're a busy police officer, and no doubt an awful lot has happened since those times.
Yes.
But on the other hand, these were they not fairly unusual events?
Very unusual events.
And is it fair to say that you still have some memory of them, even
Absolutely.
if not the precise words of conversations and so on?
Yes, absolutely.
If we could look, please, at the first page. We're back to the first page. Thank you. You give us a summary of your police career in paragraph 1 of your statement, Inspector. In summary, even more summarised, is it right that you joined Wiltshire Police as a constable in 2006?
Yes.
By the time of the events in question, which were July 2018, you were a detective sergeant,
Yes,
and you're now a detective inspector.
I am.
Thank you. And again, if we can just focus in on the chronology. This inquiry has now heard quite a lot of evidence about the events in March 2018 and the poisoning of the Scripples and the investigations that followed, which Wiltshire Police named Operation Fairline. I think it's right to say that you didn't have any involvement in that at all.
I had no involvement in Operation Fairline.
That's a little surprising given what we've heard about quite what a large investigation it was. Can you explain why you didn't have anything to do with that?
Yes, so at the time of Operation Fairline in March 2018, I was involved in a different operation, quite a large operation, which was also happening in Salisbury at the time, and I was dedicated to that operation. And therefore, my focus remained there, and I was not involved in any of the circumstances around Fairline at all.
And I think it's right to say that was about a completely different subject matter concerning child abuse.
Completely unrelated.
So you never took any, as it were, active steps, or you never had any formal role to play in Operation Fairline, but you must have been aware that it was going on. You shared an office, I'm sure, with people who were very much involved in that operation.
Absolutely. I worked in the same office, and I'm from the Salisbury area, so it was very much present around me. I just had no direct involvement in the actual investigation.
And then moving forward in the chronology, again, we've heard about the events of the weekend of the 30th of June, Saturday, and the 1st of July. Indeed, we've just heard about Inspector, or Sergeant, as she then was, Laws's involvement on those 2 days. On the Saturday, Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley being taken to hospital, being admitted, being cared for by Dr. Jukes. And then on the Sunday, further discussions that were taking place between the police and Dr. Jukes about the developing understanding of prognosis and so on. Were you working on either or both of those days?
No, I was not.
And then if we can go, thank you, to page 2 of your statement. And look at paragraph 4. So it's INQ 006106. Paragraph 4, you indicate what you've just told us, which is that you weren't working over the weekend. you returned to work at 0800 hours on Monday the 2nd of July. Now, we've heard in the statement we've just read from Kerry Laws that her role over that weekend, working the night shift, was, I forget the precise detail, but she was essentially the duty sergeant for CID for the south of the county, which included Amesbury. Were you performing the same role when you came to work on that Monday morning?
Yes.
So you were you actually, we've seen Kerry Laws finishing her shift at about midnight, I think. Would there have been someone between her and you?
No.
Or not?
There's an on-call facility for detective sergeants across the county, but there would be nobody actively working between those hours.
So, albeit with a sort of deferred period in between, you were taking over from Kerry Laws?
That's correct.
Thank you. Then if we can go back and look at document INQ 005044, please. Page 4, thank you. Now, in her statement, Kerry Laws describes this as having been a handover email. Mm-hmm. Would this have been an email that was, at least in part, designed to hand over to you?
Yes, absolutely. It's circulated across the force to different individuals. However, the main recipient would have been myself.
I mean, we've seen and we will see a dazzling array of different ways of conveying information within the police: logs, niches, emails, and no doubt it changes depending on whether there's an operation underway and so on. But on a day-by-day basis, is it an email like this that you would always expect to receive from the person who had preceded you?
Yes, this is the document that I would read first of all when coming onto duty. It is the handover document from the previous evening. So it's pretty standard document that we'd receive.
And is it the practice then that there is, I mean, we can see that this is entitled CID South East Handover. Mm-hmm. So you would is this fair? You would always expect to find a handover email?
Yes.
Might there be other emails floating around which are also relevant to the handover, to you picking up the baton from whoever came before you?
It's possible that other emails could be sent to focus on particular incidents or to provide additional information relating to particular incidents. So it's very possible you would get additional emails. However, this is the handover document is the primary email that you would receive to inform you of what's gone on previously and whether there is any actions that need to be undertaken by myself and my team the following day.
The reason I ask, and we'll come back to this because, as you say, this was the formal document, but if we could go back a page to the third page of this document, please. We see, if we scroll up, yeah, that's it. So what we see here is not a handover email, certainly that's not the title of it, it's titled Overdose. It was sent by Kerry Laws earlier that evening at 10 o'clock, so 2 hours or so before the midnight handover email. It's got a much smaller circulation list. She's sending it to the coroner's office and also just to a few police officers, including you, do we see there? Erin Martin,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Immediately after the coroner's office. So why do you think we can't ask Kerry Laws? Can you help us with why you think she included you as a recipient of this email?
Specifically, she included me because I was the next oncoming detective sergeant. She's also included the detective inspector for that area as well. So she's trying to circulate this additional information to a particular persons that she knows it will be relevant for, i.e. the individuals that are going to be managing any particular incident moving forward. I can also see that she's added additional people within the CID office that day, so to give some reassurance that that email is received and acted upon.
And can we take it, and we might be testing your memory too far, but can we take it then that when you came into the office on the Monday, the morning afterwards, you would have seen not only in your inbox the formal handover email from midnight, but that earlier email from a couple of hours before?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you remember now, were there any other emails or not?
I would have received the handover from the previous night as well, because that is circulated to all. It's a fixed circulation process. However, I would have focused my attention on the more relevant, which was the handover from the previous evening.
Yes. Well, let's go back to that for now then, please. So if we go back to page 4. Dear all, yes. So we've heard what Kerry Law's summary of that document. We can see it ourselves. Most of the document really is dealing with conveying the latest information from the hospital, and in particular the theory that this may have been not a simple opioid overdose, but it may have involved some sort of organophosphate poisoning as well. Is that fair?
Yes.
Now, we've heard that for many police officers, experience of opioid overdoses is sadly a relatively common thing. Was your experience the same?
Sorry, repeat the question again.
In 2018, did you have experience, and if so, how much experience of opioid overdoses?
Very minimal experience of opioid overdoses and drugs in general. It's not an area of expertise that I had. I had some general awareness, I would probably describe it as.
And what this case raised was an extra element, not just an opioid overdose, but the possibility of organophosphate poisoning. Was that something that you were familiar with or not?
No, I had never heard the term organophosphate prior to my involvement.
So what did you do? Can you help us with your sort of reaction to reading this email, as you've just explained, telling you about an ongoing case which perhaps took you out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, absolutely. So the email, I deduced from the email that we had 2 individuals in hospital who were seriously ill as a result of a drug-related incident. And I deduced from that pesticide poisoning was due to that being cut with, or a drug being cut with pesticides. And I understood that. I understood that process. I understood why that happens. And at that point, I took that at face value. That is what we were dealing with.
When you say you understood that and why that happened, what was your understanding of
So
why
I
that
understood
happened?
generally that certain drugs are cut with other substances to bulk those drugs out for sale. And so when I saw that, when I read that email, that there was a potential pesticide poisoning because the drug had been cut with a pesticide, I understood that process. I understood why that would happen.
Right. We'll come to hear that that theory was actually quite an unlikely one, because
Yes.
as at 2018, it was quite rare for pesticides that were available to have organophosphates in them.
Yes.
Was that something you were aware of when
No.
you read the email that morning, or not?
No, it's not something that I, prior to contacting the hospital, which we'll discuss, it's not something that I considered until that conversation.
Okay. And just sticking with the email, we see in the, if we can scroll up, please, the third main paragraph, there's a reference to a female, that's Dawn Sturgess, her condition deteriorating. And then at the end of that second line and going over into the third, there's a sentence saying there are concerns this may affect the wider community, and they will have more people presenting with similar symptoms. What did you take from that?
I agreed. that given the circumstances that are presented in this email and the circumstances that I then went to find out through further conversations, I agreed that given the information we had at that time, there was a significant concern for public safety.
Of whom?
Of specifically our drug using community.
Does it come to this, that on the theory that these two patients may have had a reaction to, let's call it a bad batch or contaminated drugs, there might be other people who would have access to the same batch and would then have the same symptoms?
Absolutely, that's a very valid and, given the circumstances, a realistic concern at that time that other individuals that may be exposed to a contaminated batch of drugs could become seriously ill.
Just shifting focus very slightly, looking at this email and imagining you reading it on that Monday morning, that it contains the names, of course, of the two people who were in hospital.
Yes.
Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess.
Yes.
Charlie Rowley, did that name mean anything to you that morning?
Yes.
How and what?
Whilst I've never had any personal involvement with Charlie Rowley throughout my career, he was a well-known drug dealer within the Salisbury area. He was known by many officers through intelligence and through general policing. I'd been a police officer in Salisbury by that point for over 12 years, and he was a very well-known individual within our policing community.
So just to be clear, especially you describe well-known, being well-known to other police officers, but just to start with, I'm asking you as to what it meant, his name meant to you personally,
Yep.
simply by reading the email, without talking to anyone about it. And did what you've just said occur to you without the need to talk to anyone?
Absolutely. When I heard Charles Rowley's name, I knew that he was a drug dealer and a drug user within the Salisbury area.
What about Dawn Sturgess?
No, I had never heard Dawn Sturgess' name before. She was not known to me.
And if we can just go back, please, now to the earlier email, the 10 o'clock email. So it's page 3 of the same document. Thank you. And you've, I think, said, Inspector, this email would have been in your inbox, addressed to you. We've established that. And can we take it that you would have read it at around the same time as you reading the update?
Yes.
And if we scroll down to a little bit further down, please, just the paragraph with the second redaction in it, we see reference to Stephen Jukes, the doctor, contacting police, stating he believed there's an organophosphate element to this overdose, so that much was really captured by the later email as well. The view that it's still an overdose, and then the comment from Kerry Laws that these are two well-known drug addicts. Well, you've explained that, at least as far as Charlie Rowley is concerned, that was simply have confirmed your own understanding. But that, from what you've said, would have told you something new about Dawn Sturgess.
Yes.
At that stage, would you have simply taken it from this email that was an accurate description of the position, or would you have done anything else to make your own inquiries about Dawn Sturgess's?
At that stage, I would have taken that at face value. This is a handover document prepared by my colleague. The information in there is information that I would have taken, and in the way that we would normally work. I wouldn't look to redo the work that my colleague had done. That is the purpose of the handover. So I would have taken that at face value.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that a little bit later, but that at least was your reading at the start of the day, 8 o'clock or so.
Yes.
If we could, well, so I was about to go on to a slightly different subject. I just noticed the time. It's 11:15, which is the time we normally break.
Yes.
For a break.
11:30?
Great, sir.
11:30.
Ms Martin, keep your counsel, please. You're in the middle of giving your evidence, and be back at 11:30.
All right.
Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
Inspector, we are still on the Monday morning. Your shift has commenced at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we have discussed the handover email that you saw and also that earlier email that would also have been waiting for you on your arrival. And we saw that much of the content, certainly of the handover email, was concerned with the diagnosis at the hospital and the ongoing concern about the two patients there. It's right, I think, that within a fairly short period of seeing those emails, you made touch with the hospital.
Yes.
And if we could go to your statement, please, at paragraph, so it's INQ 006106, page 3. We can see at paragraph 11, so towards the bottom of that page, you say that you contacted the hospital at 10 o'clock that morning.
That's right.
Was that by going there in person, as Kerry Laws had, or by telephone?
No, that was by telephone.
And we can see from that paragraph that you spoke to Dr. Dukes.
That's correct.
We'll talk about the detail of the conversation in a moment. But in general terms, first of all, do you still have a memory of that conversation?
Yes, I do.
Was it the only conversation you had with Dr. Dukes that day?
Yes.
Very roughly speaking, how long did it last?
15 minutes.
And looking at paragraph 11, we can see, of course, you were asking him about Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess. We can see 4 or 5 lines down you've included the fact that they were in a critical but stable condition. It would appear, looking at the sentences or so below that he's explained something about the breakdown of enzymes in their bodies and organophosphate poisoning. You've told us that you knew next to nothing about these matters. Did he tell you a little bit about how it all worked?
Yes, Dr. Dukes was extremely helpful in explaining really clearly and in simple terms what was meant by an organophosphate poisoning and the likely cause of that, which was described to me as a pesticide poisoning. And
about 6 lines down in this paragraph, you've recorded he went on to tell me that the likely cause was pesticide, it says positioning, but we'll read it as poisoning, also called organophosphate poisoning. So just to be clear then, that morning, his message to you was what he regarded as, does that mean the most likely cause?
Yes.
And you've told us that he explained some of the science behind all of that. And that, of course, is what we've heard from Kerry Laws, that was the position that the day before. Did he go on to talk to you about other possible scenarios?
Yes. Yes.
And what did he say?
So Dr. Dukes explained to me that the treatment for organophosphate poisoning was the exact same treatment as for a nerve agent, in which was experienced in Salisbury 3 months prior. And he explained to me he had direct involvement in that, and so direct experience of that treatment. So he explained to me that the presentation was the same as with a nerve agent poisoning.
Presentation the same, and did I hear you say the treatment was the same?
The medical presentation and the treatment were the same.
I see.
Yes.
If we can just scroll down, for those of us with a hard copy, it means going to the next page, paragraph 12 of your statement. What's recorded there is Dr. Dukes telling you that this presentation, that is the presentation of Dawn and Charlie, was so rare, or rather the presentation of the Scripples and Nick Bailey was so rare and similar to this case that he couldn't rule out a similar cause. Do we take it from that he was suggesting the possibility that Dawn and Charlie had been poisoned not by organophosphate cut with their drugs, but with a nerve agent?
So, to be clear, Dr. Dukes was informing me that the primary hypothesis, the primary thought, was that it was a pesticide poisoning, an organophosphate poisoning via a pesticide through a drugs overdose. That was the primary hypothesis. But he could not rule out the possibility that there was a nerve agent involvement due to the similarities in the symptoms and in the treatment. So that is really what I took from that conversation.
And we can see, because it's up on the screen, the words that that apparently he talked about, including that it was an incredible coincidence. What exactly do you remember him saying was an incredible coincidence?
So the conversation I had with Dr. Jukes, I've summarised the conversation we had, but those two words are words that I specifically remember and have quoted him saying to me, because they really stood out for me and started to form my actions from my conversation with him. What he was referring to, or what I took from that conversation, was that both a nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury 3 months prior in March and a pesticide poisoning are both rare in their own right. To see a pesticide poisoning presentation is very, very rare due to pesticides not being made with organophosphates any longer. So the incredible coincidence was referring to the fact that in this hospital in Salisbury, we'd had both of these rare occurrences happen within 3 months of each other. He called that an incredible coincidence.
And so did you take that as providing at least some support for what you've described as the secondary hypothesis?
Yes.
It made you think that the possibility, at least, of the nerve agent answer to this was at least something to be considered?
For me, if it was a possibility, it had to be considered. Something that serious, if it was a possibility, we had to explore that possibility, and therefore a secondary hypothesis was formed in my mind. I still felt at that stage the primary hypothesis, the most likely hypothesis, was still a pesticide poisoning. However, we could not rule out, Dr. Jukes couldn't rule out, and therefore I could not rule out that they could have become ill via a nerve agent.
Now, I'm not going to go back to them, but in the handover email and the earlier documents from Kerry Laws, certainly there was a report of the organophosphate pesticide theory, but the real possibility of a nerve agent, perhaps other than the reference to the ambulance and fire brigade panicking, perhaps didn't come out as clearly. But from you, tell us what your views were. Did you regard this as being a development in your understanding of the case?
Yes. Through the handover documents that I received, although there was reference to a consideration of nerve agent, that wasn't my consideration prior to my conversation with Dr. Jukes. Prior to that conversation, the hypothesis of a drugs overdose and pesticide poisoning were very forefront in my mind. It wasn't until that conversation with Dr. Jukes that I started to consider that there could be another cause.
Thank you. Let me move on in the narrative, Inspector. I want to ask you about an email that you wrote that day.
Yes.
And if we could have it up on screen, please. It's INQ 005293. Now, this is a slightly odd document, Inspector, in the sense we can see it's an email, but it doesn't have, as we usually see, details of the time or date it was sent or the people it was sent to, as, for example, we've seen with Kerry Laws's emails. We'll get in a minute to try to work out exactly when it was sent, and you can tell us who it was sent to. But first of all, can you just tell us why you wrote this email?
Yes, this is an update. So you'll see at the top, it says niche. That is our police computer internal systems.
Yeah.
And so when we are doing investigations, we will update that system with the development of our evidence and our investigations.
So what's this, an entry on your computer systems?
So this is an email which I've put together to form an entry. So many times I might be updating several different sources, the log, the niche, and individuals. And on this occasion, I have formed it in an email and then to be copied into different sources where we would store information.
Right.
And indeed, we can find the text of this email in various different places.
That's right.
And one of them, this may help if we look at this briefly. If we can go to INQ 005002, please. We go to the first page initially. So this is it said storm log. In one or two sentences, Inspector, what's a storm log?
The storm is an internal term to describe the system that's used, but a storm log is an incident log that's it's recorded live. While an incident is live, we'll be recording all that information. That will be collated within our control room, which is central to the force, and information will be relayed between different units, different officers, and the control room.
And if we can go within this document to page 4, please. Can you see 3 lines down at 13:56 on this day, the 2nd of July, someone has put an entry on this log. Please can you add this update to log 90? It may be cut off. And then what we can see below is in chunks the text of the email we were just looking at and being sort of relayed via this system. So what's happening there?
So I don't have access to the log, to the lifetime log. That's accessed and updated by our control room. So what you see here is me emailing the control room and asking them to update log 90, which is the log that we're looking at, with the information that I have placed in that email. Again, one of the sources of information that I would update.
And it state the obvious, therefore your email must have been written no later than 13:56.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So if we can go back to the text of the email, please. It's INQ 005293. And if we look at the first paragraph and the section starting the update from the hospital this morning, is that you relaying what you had heard from Dr. Jukes on the phone call you've just described?
Yes.
And several lines below that, after there's a reference to organophosphate poisoning, we also then see, at this stage, the doctor cannot rule out the possibility that these 2 patients have been exposed to a nerve agent, although he believes that to be unlikely. Is that
Yes.
a summary of that secondary
Yes.
hypothesis you've mentioned to us?
Yes.
And then if we look further up there, please, in the second line of that paragraph, in your summary of the events, we can see that you have referred to the 2 individuals, Charlie and Dawn, and said that both are well-known local heroin users. Tell us why you included that in the email.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously now we know that that's an error, and that, as I've already explained, Charlie Rowley was known to me as a heroin user and a heroin dealer within the area. But as I've already explained, Dawn Sturgess was not known to me at that point. That, however, I was given a handover which contained information suggesting that Dawn was a heroin user, which is why I think that I've added those words. However, I recognise now that this is inaccurate, and of course I apologise if that's caused any upset or concern to other people.
It has caused upset and concern, we know that.
Yes.
To the Sturgess family, and your Assistant Chief Constable has apologised.
Yes.
And we've all heard that apology. It was, of course, quite an important factual aspect of this case, wasn't it, that Charlie was a known drug user, but Dawn wasn't?
Yes.
I mean, looking back on it, knowing that, provides a bit of an insight, doesn't it, into the likelihood that they had both taken contaminated drugs.
With the information we had at the time on that morning, I think it continued. It was a reasonable hypothesis that both had either ingested or come into contact with drugs that had caused them to fall very ill. Although that line there, both well-known local heroin users, is an unfortunate line, the hypothesis that Dawn had ingested drugs or had come into contact with drugs that had caused her to be ill was a valid hypothesis at that time, given the information that we had. And it was a hypothesis that was important to explore.
Agreed. That's what you say in your statement. Mm-hmm. It was a hypothesis and it was an understandable one.
Yes.
The point I wanted to ask you is slightly different. Knowing, as we do know now, and imagine, for example, that one of your team at the time, who had also read the handover note from Kerry Laws, and had said, well, actually, that's not right. I know these two. I know that Charlie Rowley is a drug user, but I'm confident that Dawn isn't. That would have been a valuable piece of information for you to use in your investigation, wouldn't it?
Yes.
You may still have hypothesised, but you would equally have had at the back of your mind, we can't be so sure that they both took some contaminated drugs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we can look, please, at go back to your witness statement. So it's INQ 006106 and page 5. It's the very bottom of that page, please. In fact, it goes over to the next one. You say, it's paragraph 24. As the day progressed, I developed information from multiple sources, including police intelligence systems. I discovered that Dawn Sturgess was primarily known for alcohol dependency and was not known as a drug user. And then you go on to make the point you've said, however, it remained a valid consideration based on her hypothesis, on her association with Charlie. So can you help us with this then? Later in the day, did you become aware that what Kerry Laws had put in that earlier email was not accurate and that Dawn was not a known drug user?
The intelligence on our system told us that there was no intelligence to support that Dawn had taken drugs or had been a drug user in the past. There was nothing on PNC to suggest that she had any previous involvement with drugs. I don't think I considered analysing Kerry's previous handovers at that point. My mind was very much set on the process that I was following. But clearly, as the day progressed, the information developed, and which clearly strengthened other hypotheses.
Well, yeah, but sticking with this hypothesis, you've explained how you took what you heard from Kerry Laws at the beginning of the day as read.
Yes.
But then you're adding in this witness statement that your understanding developed later in the day.
Yes.
And you became more confident, or you understood that in contrast to Charlie, Dawn, there was no intelligence or evidence to suggest that she was a drug user. So did that, first of all, did that cause you to sort of rethink the hypothesis about them both having taken contaminated drugs?
No.
Did you think that you needed to correct what you'd put in the log earlier on the day about them both being well-known heroin users?
It wasn't a conscious thought, so I didn't think to do that.
But looking back on it, by sending that email, you had, as it were, compounded the problem that had been created with Kerry Laws. And we've seen that the email was then put on the log and was presumably accessible to all sorts of people who might make the very mistake that you had made by simply assuming that what they were being told was true. So if it is the case that with your investigation you had begun to understand that this wasn't accurate and that Dawn wasn't a known drug user, don't you think you should have flagged that in some way so that people had a better understanding of the factual situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand what you're saying, and maybe in hindsight, I should have given more attention to highlighting the misinformation that we had. However, on my next updates, the following updates the next day, I allude to the fact that we're not seeing presentation of drugs within Dawn's bloods. And on top, further down the line, I attended an SCG briefing in which I would have relayed that information quite clearly within that briefing. So I recognise that it may have been a better situation to have included a more direct reference to that misinformation that we initially started with.
Well, shouldn't you have put in some reference saying the earlier emails say that they're both known drug users? In fact, only one of them is, actually adverting to the point. Might that have been sensible?
Yes, absolutely.
And in fact, so we'll deal with this point now, although it's slightly out of the chronology. If we could have INQ 005707, please. You referred a moment ago to the SCG meeting, Inspector.
Yes.
Which was late the following day, wasn't it?
Yes.
On the third, late in the evening on the 3rd of July.
Yes.
After the Novichok and sort of assessment had been made.
Yes.
These are not your notes, I don't think, of the meeting.
They are not my notes.
But we can see in the sort of list of attendees at the top there, you're one of them.
Yes.
Erin Martin, EM. Yes?
Yes.
And a little bit further down that page, can you see there's EM in a circle and it says info and intel?
Yes.
And then 2 or 3 lines below that, possible drug overdose, 2 known drug users.
Yes.
So far from correcting the position, or you're actually repeating the same mistake the next day, even though you had by that stage understood that Dawn wasn't a drug user, if I've understood your evidence.
Well, absolutely. And again, it's unfortunate terminology. But I would say these are not my notes. I did not write these. Was not asked to approve these notes. I'd never seen these notes prior to approximately 2 to 3 months ago. It was the first time I was aware that these notes had been written. In that briefing, I would have given approximately 15-20 minute briefing of the chronology of the investigation and the circumstances that I was presented with. You'll see here that the 2 known drug users phrase is right at the start of my briefing that I would have given. To be really clear, whilst I can't recall everything that I said in that briefing, I knew that Dawn was not a drug user. I knew that she had not become ill due to her exposure or ingestion of drugs. I knew that her illness was related to a nerve agent poisoning. I knew there was no intelligence to support her taking drugs, and I would have absolutely relayed that through that briefing. But it is entirely possible that when I started the briefing, I would have started giving the information that I came into, the information that I was briefed on, that started this investigation, because in order to give that full chronology of the events for the previous 2 days.
So I think I've understood, Inspector, what the suggestion is. You may have said, when I took over yesterday morning, I was told that they were 2 known drug users, but actually I now know that only one of them is, and Dawn has no record of taking drugs.
Yes.
And that whoever wrote these notes, not you, got the first half but not the second half.
Yes.
Well, we don't know who wrote these notes, and that may be as far as we can take it. But you do, I think you have agreed with me that this is not a sort of a worthless factual piece of information. It was very relevant to how this poisoning may have taken place, was it not?
Yes.
And do you also agree that it was very important, once you realised that the information you had received from Kerry Laws was inaccurate, to make sure that everyone understood the correct state of affairs?
Yes.
And for reasons we may never know, that doesn't seem to have come across to the person who was making these notes, does it?
Absolutely not. No.
Is this the only page of these notes, Mr. O'Connor?
No, so there are many more, and I have read them.
Sorry, that is the only page.
So, no, there are I think 6 or 7 pages of these notes.
Right.
I have not seen anything further that touches on this issue.
Right.
I'm
Thank
sure
you.
if
That
others
answers
think there
the
is,
question.
we will see it. In any event, that's perhaps as far as we can take that point, Inspector. Let me go back, because we went out of order. Let me go back to the day before, please, and let me ask you about a couple of other matters that happened on that Monday. The first was the question of what happened at John Baker House, which was where Dawn Sturgess had been living. If we can go to your witness statement, please. So INQ 006106, page 5. Paragraph 22. It is recorded there that you took a decision to secure and lock down both 9 Muggleton Road and also the address of Dawn Sturgess, the Cedar Room at John Baker House. And you explain why there. I won't take you to it, I don't think it's necessary, but we can see in the log a suggestion that actually you had attended John Baker House that morning in order to conduct a search of Dawn Sturgess's room. Is that right?
That is in the log, but that is incorrect. We did not attend John Baker House to conduct a search.
You said we did not attend. Let's just take it in stages. Did you go to John Baker House that morning?
No.
Did someone called Police Constable Day go to John Baker House
Yes.
that morning? Is that a he or a she?
He.
Did he go on your instructions?
Yes.
And why did you send him?
Public safety reasons, to make sure that the lockdown of Dawn Sturgess's room was complete, and to just speak to staff about any other presentation within John Baker House of concern around the use of drugs, pesticide poisonings, etc. So,
was it ever in your mind that he should conduct a search of the room that morning?
very briefly, one of the considerations was to go and search the room for drugs paraphernalia and any excess drugs that may be there. But actually, the consideration of the secondary hypothesis of a nerve agent precluded that. And we felt the most sensible action to take at that time was to just lock down both John Baker House, the Dawn Sturgess's room, I think it was Cedar Room, if I correctly remember, at John Baker House, and 9 Muggleton Road.
And you therefore, I think it follows from what you said, that you changed your mind about whether a search should happen.
Yes.
Was that as a result of your conversation with Dr. Jukes?
Yes, absolutely.
Looking, if we can, since we're going to it, I'm going to ask you about the log. We may as well quickly go. If we can go to INQ 005002, page 2, please. Having said I wouldn't take you to the log, Inspector, since we're going to the document anyway, this is a reference, do you see here, at 1053, which appears to suggest that you, D.S. Martin, attended John Baker House in order to undertake a consensual search and so on. But you've explained that you didn't go there. It was someone called Constable Day, and he, whatever his initial purpose may have been, did not conduct a search that morning. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think, as I say, the initial thought was for myself and my team to go to John Baker House to conduct a search of the room for drugs connected to the overdose or the contamination. However, on consideration of the hypotheses that we were dealing with, especially the secondary hypothesis of a nerve agent poisoning, I made the decision that this would not be a wise search to undertake, and it could be potentially dangerous and hazardous to anyone entering that room or any other location identified, and therefore we did not undertake that search, and I did not attend John Baker House.
Thank you. Just going on to a further entry in the log, which is related. If we can go on to page 8, please. We can see right at the bottom of this page, Inspector, that, do you see at 1403, there's a reference to you having a conversation with Superintendent Burt.
Yes.
First of all, can you tell us who was Superintendent Burt and what was his sort of, was he your boss?
Yes, so Superintendent Burt was the on-duty superintendent for that week. And he, although he was not my direct line supervisor, he was supervising all activity and incidents across the county on that day. And
1403 is presumably the time on which this was entered into the log, but we can take it therefore that the conversation happened before that.
significantly before that,
Right.
yes.
What can you help us? I mean, did it happen before or after your conversation with Dr. Jukes?
It would have happened after my conversation with Dr. Jukes, and after I'd formed a secondary hypothesis. I would not have updated him necessarily at that point with the handover information, but once I'd formed a secondary hypothesis of a potential nerve agent poisoning, one of my actions would have been to raise and escalate that to Superintendent Burt.
And then if we can just scroll down and look on the next page, please. We can see the way in which it's put is he asked you to prioritise a number of inquiries, which are numbered. And the first one is locking down both of the addresses.
Yes.
And from what you've said, is that something that, in fact, was in hand anyway?
That had been done, quite a couple of hours previously to that.
And then number 2 is speak with Dr. Jukes to understand when the blood work will be returned. That was something that you had discussed with him.
Already done, yes.
Already done. And then establish which staff, that's police staff, is it?
Yes,
May have been exposed, that presumably those who had attended Muggleton Road the night before,
yes.
or 2 nights before. There's then this entry below that. Superintendent Burt consulted with Superintendent Minty regarding and utilised his knowledge of Op Fairline. He recommends in the first instance the blood and urine work is prioritised to assist future activity. Who was Superintendent Minty?
So, Superintendent Minty is another superintendent within our force, and I understand that he was specifically working on Operation Fairline at the time, though I can't confirm that.
I mean, just to remind ourselves, Operation Fairline is what was still then the ongoing investigation following the Skripal attack.
Yes.
You may or may not have been aware about that conversation at the time.
I was aware that Superintendent Burt had escalated it, but I was not aware or privy to that conversation.
Thank you. If we can take that document down and go back to your statement, please, INQ 006106, and go to page 6. At paragraph 26, you refer to your increasing concern that a nerve agent could have been the cause of of Dawn and Charlie's symptoms, and you refer there to contacting Superintendent Burt. Is that the discussion we've just had?
Yes.
And to him telling you that he would escalate the situation up to senior managers. Mm-hmm. What were you expecting him to do, if anything? I mean, did you have a precise understanding of what he would do?
No, I obviously fully aware that Operation Fairline was still active, and that a secondary nerve agent would be directly linked to that. My expectation was that he would escalate it to those that would have an understanding of Operation Fairline and how this would impact that. But I would not have at that time been aware of or have an expectation as to in what form that would be.
Looking now, we see that he did speak to Superintendent Minty. Would that fall within the definition of escalation
Yes.
as you understood it at the time?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to stick with your witness statement, but ask you about a separate matter, something else that happened that day. So If we can go back to page 4, please, in your witness statement, and paragraph 18, it's at the bottom of the page. You refer in this paragraph, Inspector, to contacting Wiltshire Police Corporate Communications Department about a media release that day.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, provide some context for what happened, please?
Absolutely. Given the hypothesis that was, again, the primary hypothesis at this stage with the information that we had, I contacted the media department because I was very concerned about a public health risk, specifically to members of our drug using community. And I asked them to draft a press release warning potential users of drugs, specifically heroin and crack cocaine, to be mindful that we could potentially have a contaminated batch of drugs, and also, if they felt ill, to seek medical attention.
Just to be clear, you've told us about the two hypotheses that you had in your mind following your discussion with Dr. Dukes, and both of them involve a public health concern. Do I understand it rightly that it was the first of the two hypotheses, the contaminated drugs, the possible organophosphate cut drugs, that this media release was aimed at? And so, if we can go, please, to INQ 004568. We see under the large heading media release, just that, a media release dated the 2nd of July, which is the day we're talking about. Was this the media release that you effected that day?
Yes.
And I think you said it was drafted by a different organisation within the police service, but would they have sent it to you before releasing it?
Yes, I would have approved this to be released.
One small oddity, if you're looking at the second paragraph, it talks about emergency services being called to an address in Penny Lane. There is a Penny Lane in Amesbury, but that's not where they were called, is it?
No, it's not. Penny Lane is a road quite close to Muggleton Road. It was a new build estate, and so I think there was Muggleton Road wasn't yet on any of our mappings, and so Penny Lane came from information at the top of the log in order to direct officers there, and it's an error on our part that wasn't corrected to say Muggleton Road.
Because you knew that it had been Muggleton Road.
Yes, absolutely.
All of the handover emails that you've been talking about talk about Muggleton Road, don't they? But if we go 2 paragraphs down, the substantive part, you are quoted as saying, "At this stage, we believe that 2 patients have fallen ill after using from a contaminated batch of drugs, possibly heroin or crack cocaine." And then you can see, in summary, you're urging people to take care in that community.
Yes.
There was a small mistake about the address, but is the rest of it what you wanted to convey?
Yes.
Did you talk to Dr. Dukes or your superiors about doing this, or was this something that you felt needed to be done and did?
No, I made the decision to put the press release out myself.
Just tell us a little bit more about the process. Did it, as far as you're aware, was it taken up by the media that day? Do you monitor that, or do you not know whether it actually gets taken up and broadcast or published?
I was aware that it was taken up. I was aware that it was publicised, and in terms of following up, normally that's something that would happen. Media would come to me and ask me if there was any information that came to light. Same for our control room. I didn't specifically follow the news story myself throughout that day because I had focuses elsewhere.
Yes, thank you. If we could Yeah, if we go to go back to your statement, please. INQ 006106. And page 6. The last action that day that I want to ask you about, Inspector, is that it's referenced at paragraph 27, and in fact we saw it in the log, the actions that you were discussing with Superintendent Burt. The welfare issue of the officers who'd attended Muggleton Road. What steps did you take in that regard?
That was, we had officers contact them by telephone to check on their welfare, to make sure they weren't having any symptoms or feeling ill, and just to give them advice to contact us, or alternatively contact medical professionals if they did start to feel ill.
That was something that Kerry Laws described in her statement, actually, sort of administering questionnaires. Was that what happened on that day, or
No,
did that happen
that is
later?
not what happened on that day. That's something that would have happened later. However, it's not something that I recall myself having happened.
Well, in any event, it sounds as though it was a sort of second stage of the same exercise.
Yes, this is not related to that. So this is really just a general welfare checks of those individuals that that attended Muggleton Road, and also I believe other individuals that were present, such as Charlie Rowley's friend Sam Hobson. I think we did a welfare check on him as well.
Thank you. Now we can see, if we can just pull back out, that's actually the last paragraph relating to the Monday, the 2nd of July, in your statement.
Yes.
And what your shift started at 8 o'clock that morning, so
Yes.
what time would it have ended?
Approximately 4 o'clock, though I don't know what time I'd have actually left, but I wouldn't have left much later than 5.
Yeah. And then reading down the same page, we can see that you were doing the same shift again the next day.
That's
so you
correct.
were back in at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
I think we can see from paragraph 28, did you, again, fairly early in your shift, attempt to contact the hospital and find out what the up-to-date position was?
That's right, yes. I very early in the shift, I contacted the hospital and spoke to Dr. Donaldson.
And we saw, when we were just looking at the earlier documents and Superintendent Burt's actions to you, that one of the considerations you'd had the previous day was understanding the blood test results.
Yes.
Was your understanding that the test results, by the time you spoke to Dr. Donaldson on the Tuesday morning, had come back?
So, absolutely. So Dr. Donaldson informed me that the test results had come back on that Tuesday morning.
And in summary, what did you understand those tests to show?
That Charlie Rowley tested positive for both heroin and cocaine. However, Dawn Sturgess had no trace of heroin in her system. She had a small trace of non-recent cocaine usage in her system, but that would have not been relevant to the incident. So I deduced from that we did not have a connection via drugs between these two patients.
I'm going back to the hypothesis 1 and hypothesis 2 that we were
Yes.
discussing earlier. What did it tell you in that context?
That hypothesis 1 was very nearly debunked, and that hypothesis 2 was becoming more and more likely.
I mean, we'll hear from Dr. Dukes about the test results and so on, but did Dr. Donaldson tell you at that stage, reading the results, it looks like this is a nerve agent poisoning, or was he not as clear as
He
that?
didn't give me any, from what I can remember, we didn't have a conversation about that. He didn't offer any opinion on that. He just wanted to relay to me the condition of the patient and the results from the blood tests.
But just in that case, on your understanding that day, did you understand perhaps that it was at least as likely, if not more likely, on that Tuesday that you would be dealing with a nerve agent poison?
It definitely heightened my concern.
My note is hypothesis 1 very nearly debunked, hypothesis 2 more and more likely.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But as Dr. Donaldson had not given you confirmation of that there was nerve agent.
No.
And I think it was, in fact, not until towards the end of the day, in fact, after you had finished your shift
Yes.
on that day, that further results came through confirming the presence of Novichok in Dawn and or Charlie's blood.
Yes.
Is that right? And if we can go to page 7 of your statement and look at the bottom of that page, it's paragraph 34. You record the fact that by that stage, no doubt having stopped at 4 or 5 o'clock on that day, by 7 o'clock you were at home off duty, but you received a phone call from DSTL, and we will hear that they had been involved in that second round of testing. They informed you that whilst they had not completed testing and could not give a formal result, the early tests indicated that the patient had been exposed to a nerve agent likely to be Novichok.
Yes.
And what happened then?
I immediately contacted Superintendent Burt and said that it was very, very likely we had a second nerve agent incident due to the results from DSTL.
And we've already looked at those handwritten notes of the SCG meeting
Yes.
that took place later that evening. Was that meeting called as a result of your
Yes.
call to Superintendent Burt?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Inspector. Those are all the questions I have for you. There will be some further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Are there other questions?
Good morning. My name is Michael Mansfield. I represent the family
Hello, sir.
of Dawn Sturgess. And I'm going to just ask you 1 or 2 follow-up questions and try and stick to the chronology because it's some time ago, and without doing that it may be difficult for you to recall. So I want to start with the situation between the Skripal incident, in which you played no part, and the Amesbury incident. Now, I want to ask particularly whether after the Salisbury Skripal incident, were you provided with any updates of information in relation to Operation Fairline?
Not that I recall.
Did you have any position which would have led to you expecting it?
No, the only updates I'd ever received would have been general force-wide emails being
I think
sent.
that may be what you're being asked about.
Oh, apologies.
all right.
Yeah, general information may have come out, but I can't recall specifically what they might have been.
Well, I'd like to, difficult though it is, to put yourself back in the situation at the time. What had happened in Salisbury was traumatic, and everlasting, not to be forgotten.
Of course.
On your patch, if I can put it that way, or manner, however you describe it, right?
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
So you would have had a continuing interest in that situation. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you're getting material through, in the normal way, of course, did you get any kind of information at all about what was happening in the wake of this incident?
I mean, you'd have to be more specific.
Well, I can be, but-
Yes. I mean, for example, we had our police station closed down. We then had to move out, so we had information around that. We had information around updates on what was happening, but I can't recall any specific information.
All right. Well, I'll
I think you need to be quite a lot more specific, Mr.
Yeah, I
Mansfield,
will
if we're
be.
going to get there.
Apologies.
It's not your fault, Mr. Mansfield.
I'm sorry to ask the open question first, but of course I can put to you what I said. It seems you didn't have any of the information I'm going to put to you. First of all, were you given any information or training about Novichok, which had blasted its way into Salisbury?
No.
No. In other words, you were not given any information about what it might look like, how it might be contained, and how it might be treated.
Yes, that's correct.
Still less did you have any information about how somebody suffering from such an attack might present in terms of signs and symptoms. Is that right?
Yes, I received no information about that.
Now, we're just dealing with this interim period. You would have been aware, wouldn't you, that there was a search going on for possibility of more Novichok?
That's a difficult question to answer. Now, obviously that's clear that was happening, but it wasn't in my consciousness at the time. I didn't think about that, and it wasn't something that I considered at the time. It was definitely something that I considered as this incident unfolded.
Yes. I'm dealing with, before we get to Amesbury itself,
Yes, I understand.
and we're dealing with a geographic area that involves your supervision as a senior officer. So, did it occur to you, irrespective of whether you were being given information, did it occur to you that there might be more Novichok in your area?
It only really occurred to me once I was dealing with this case. Prior to that, it was not something that I
All right.
considered or thought about.
Were you made aware that Novichok in this interim period was found in places other than Salisbury and Amesbury, for example, in London?
No, I was not aware of that.
I shouldn't think so.
Traces, admittedly, but you didn't know anything about
No.
that. Now, looking back on it now retrospectively, I've been through the specifics. Do you agree that to have had information yourself on these matters would have helped you in your detective work as you came on with reasonable hypotheses?
Possibly.
Has there been any review since these matters? I still haven't got to Amesbury yet. Has there been any review about these matters? In other words, the extent to which the detective branch of Wiltshire Police were not trained, informed, and so on?
I can't answer that.
I'm so sorry.
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
You don't know, right? Well, you would know if you'd had any. Is that right?
Oh, yes, I've not received, since the second incident, I've not received any training indirectly related to nerve agent poisoning.
No. All right, I'm going to leave that now and move on, if I may, to the next period when we come to Amesbury itself. Now, I'm going to separate, there's a period before you speak to the hospital,
Yes.
and obviously a period after you've been alerted by the hospital, two separate periods. Did you, before you spoke to the hospital, were you aware that the paramedics who attended the incident you'd sort of taken over on the Monday, that the paramedics who'd gone there originally were of one mind, because of their previous experience at Salisbury, that this was a second nerve agent incident? Were you aware of that?
Not so much was, Mr. Mansfield, as could well be.
Could well be.
Yeah.
No, I was not.
Right. That would have helped you, wouldn't it, had you known that?
Yes.
And not only what they thought, but also that two emergency services who'd attended, that's the ambulance and the fire brigade, and both regarded it as a major incident and cordoned off the area. Did you know that?
I know that there was a scene put on initially, and that scene was then removed once the incident had been dealt with.
Yes. Did you know that they both regarded it as a major incident?
No.
And that's why hazardous materials were being mentioned. Did you know that?
No.
And again, it would have helped you, wouldn't it, to have known all these things?
Any information would have helped to form hypotheses. All information is important when you're dealing with incidents like this. So yes.
Just one further matter relating to Amesbury. Were you ever informed that somebody else who was at the premises had made a specific reference to Dawn indicating that she had not been indulging in drugs? Did you know that?
I was aware of that later, once
Later.
we had an intelligence download and an evidence gathering with that individual, but not at the time that you're referring to.
Right. When was it then? The individual is called Sam. I'm not going to go
Yes.
through. Yes, the same person. Yes. So when did you discover that? Do you think?
I believe possibly the information that I read was possibly on the Tuesday, either late on Monday or early on Tuesday,
Yeah.
that I got relayed the evidence that was collated from Sam that indicated that she was not a habitual drug user.
And before you learnt that, had it occurred to you to ask anyone whether anyone was at the scene and could help? Had you initiated any inquiries along those lines?
I'm sorry, can I just have that question again?
Yes, certainly.
Had it occurred to her to ask what?
To ask any members of your squad whether there were people at the scene who could help with regard to the use of drugs,
Oh, I
other
see.
police officers.
Well, the other police officers at the scene, who were my uniformed colleagues, had relayed that there was drugs paraphernalia at the address
Yes.
through the search. I don't know what other information I would request from them in relation to that.
Did you know that other people were at the address?
I knew that Mr. Hobson was at the address, and I knew that there were other uniform officers. There were other services there, such as ambulance and fire, but I was not aware of anyone else at the address at that time.
All right. Now I want to move to the next part. You phoned.
Is there a suggestion that there was anybody else there who could help with Dawn's habits?
Oh yes, Sam was
Well,
there.
we've had him.
Yeah, I'm not talking about anyone else.
Oh, right.
No. In fact, there were others, but I'm not going down that avenue. Sam has been identified, as have the others. Now, I want to move to another topic in relation to the stage when you contact the hospital, all right?
Yes.
But you've already summarised it. I'm not going to go over any of it other than the conclusion was 2 very rare presentations, one relating to the pesticide and the other relating to nerve
Yes.
agent. Now, once you knew that there was a possibility of a nerve agent, that must have concerned you greatly, because then you would have thought of Salisbury.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Now, had you been given any information, training or whatever in relation to public protection in the circumstances of a nerve agent?
No.
Did you, at the point at which you discover that, in fact, there is a risk to the public, did you take advice as to what you should be doing in those circumstances?
No.
Why not?
I escalated the situation to Superintendent Burt. My role was there to investigate those 2 hypotheses. My expectation would have been that if there was a wider public safety concern that needed to be considered up and above what I was already doing, and I already relayed to him, that he would be in management of that.
At the point at which you spoke to Superintendent Burt, at that point, had you put out any public statement about the risk of a nerve agent?
Yes.
So
Oh, no, so my apologies. No, I hadn't. A public statement in relation to the contamination of drugs. My apologies.
my
had
question there, sorry, have you finished? Yes. All right. My question therefore is, and one understands all the difficulties here, why did you not consider alerting the public to the possibility, however unlikely or likely, of a nerve agent, what they might need to do or not do, look for or not look for, and so on? Do you follow the question?
Yes, I do, absolutely.
Yes. Why did you not do
At the point that I made the press release in relation to the contaminated drugs, that was, at that point, the primary hypothesis. It's obviously hindsight now, we look and note that that wasn't the cause, but at that point, taking myself back to that with the information that I had, the intelligence that I had, that was the primary hypothesis. The secondary hypothesis that was being explored and being developed was a nerve agent. But at that point, we were not in a position to put out a press release for a hypothesis which we were still exploring and developing.
Well, I want to suggest to you, you weren't in a position to put one out about drugs either, were you, really?
I completely disagree with that.
All right. Because, in fact, it had not been proven to be drugs at the point you put
Yes.
it out. Is that right?
Absolutely accept that it's proven not to be
And-
drugs.
No. I think the premise of the question is because it hadn't been proved positively that it was drugs.
Yes, I understand.
You shouldn't have put out the media release.
I understand.
Do you agree with that or not?
No, I disagree with that.
Right.
Because the reason I'm asking these questions is that in your statement, you make it very clear that once you'd spoken to the hospital, you were keeping an open mind.
Yes.
Right. Which means that there's a risk on both fronts.
Yes.
All right. You don't ask anybody for information about how to deal with it publicly. That's your decision. That's how you want to deal with it.
Yes.
Did you refer the matter to anybody, as it were, higher up the management chain before you put out any press releases?
I believe that I would have informed Superintendent Burt prior to putting the press release out, but I can't confirm that, unfortunately. But I would have told Superintendent Burt very quickly after forming that secondary hypothesis.
Something as important as a media release, because that is important, is it not?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, right. Where would the record be kept of a decision plus the content of a media release? Where would it be on a log or an incident?
So the decision to put the media release out was my decision. I
Yeah.
contacted my media department.
Yes.
We would have conversed via email or via telephone. The media release would have been drafted. I would have approved that, and I would have approved it to be sent out.
Now, as I understand it, you didn't actually draft the release. is
No.
it? No. As you understand it, who authorised the release to be done? There are two. I'm not going back over them. But who authorised those releases?
The release that was quoted by me was authorised and released by me.
But no, above you.
No
No,
one would have
by me.
authorised it. It was authorised by myself.
All right. Now, you then have whether you call it a debriefing or a briefing at which you speak. You've been asked about this and the question of you didn't make the note of it. And in fact, when you were first asked about it, you couldn't remember saying what's alleged in at all. Do you remember?
I can't recall my exact words that I used through that briefing. It was quite some time ago, but I can relay the information that I would have given in that briefing.
Yes, well, you've done that. I'm not asking you to go over it. But what is of concern is that this is an extensive note taken at police headquarters.
Yes.
Now, would normally a note of this kind, of a meeting of this kind, be made by a staff officer
Quite possibly, or a PA.
or a PA? Do you remember who they were?
No.
Where could we find out who they were?
I don't know. I wouldn't be privy to that information.
Oh, I'll put it as a final question. Who would be privy to that information?
The chair of the SCG.
Thank you. So that's all I ask.
Right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Do you understand it, Mr. O'Connor?
In fact, I have one more question, and then
Yes.
there's another matter I'll come to after that.
Right.
So my question, Inspector, you were asked by Mr Mansfield about whether you were aware of the views that had been expressed by the ambulance service on attending in Muggleton Road about their concern that I think, to use the chair's words, it could well be a nerve agent incident. In that context, could I just ask that we go back to one of the documents we had looked at together, please, and it's INQ 005044, and it's page 3 within that document. Yes. So, Inspector, just to orientate you, this is not the handover email you had from Kerry Laws, but the one with the smaller circulation email that she sent a couple of hours earlier that night, the night before you first became involved in this.
Yes.
And I think you said that you would have read that email at probably
Yes.
the same time as the handover email.
Absolutely.
And this is something we looked at earlier when we were reading Kerry Lawes' statement, but you see the first paragraph there.
Yes.
She says, yesterday, on the 30th of June, we had a report of a possible second Operation Fairline. Would you have understood that to mean a possible
Yes.
second nerve
Yeah.
agent incident, which in essence is an overdose of 2 persons? However, ambulance and fire panicked somewhat.
Yes.
So in light of Mr Manfield's questions and
Absolutely.
asking about your understanding of that,
It's such an innocuous sentence. It was not something that the degree in which I now know the ambulance and the fire service raised their concerns, as Mr Mansfield says, declaring almost a major incident around it, scene being put on, wearing hazmat suits, etc. That's not something that I was aware of. All I was aware of is it was a consideration by ambulance and fire, and that, as indicated in that line, it was considered that they were overreacting.
yes.
So to say that I was aware of how much they were raising this issue, I would say that that's not something I was aware of.
No. And so you would have seen this, you would have read the tenor of it,
Yes.
and I think it's clear from what you said that you didn't take the matter any further. You
No.
you never understood any more about the incident than what.
No, I focused on the overdose and pesticide poisoning at that point of that handover. Yes. That's
Thank you. So there was one other matter that Ms Dolan wanted to raise. I think it may be easier if she does it herself, if she's happy to. It relates to communication between police staff and the ambulance service in the period 2nd, 3rd of July that Inspector Marsden has been talking about. So I think formally she has to ask for your permission, and perhaps I'll allow her to do that.
It relates to the notification to the ambulance service of the fact that the police are concerned, and one of their hypotheses is that this is Novichok. I'll try and take it very briefly. I will do. Yes, Martin. Hello, my name's Bridget Dolan. I represent the South West Ambulance Service. I'll try and do this quickly without taking you back to documents, because it's all documents we've seen. So I'll give you the page references for your own note. But we have seen, and it's in the storm log, which is inquiry 5002, that you spoke with Mr Burt at about 2 o'clock on the 2nd of July, and that was when he advised those actions about contacting police staff to look after their welfare and to check whether they were showing symptoms. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I think also another action was to contact Sam Hobson and see how he was.
Yes.
And that was all at 2 o'clock, around about 2 o'clock on the 2nd.
That was when it was entered into the log.
Yes, so it was slightly before that, but it was entered at 2
Yes.
o'clock. Yes. And you've told us that it was at 8 o'clock on the morning of the 3rd, the next day, that you had the conversation with Dr Jukes at the hospital.
It would have been Dr Donaldson, and it would have been after 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock was when I started my duty, so it would have been sometime sort of past that point, and it was, I say, Dr Donaldson that I spoke to.
Sorry. And I think you said it was one of the first things you did. We don't need to.
It was early that day.
Early on your shift that day, and it was that conversation which led you to debunk hypothesis 1, this is drugs,
Yeah.
and hypothesis 2, Novichok becomes more likely.
I think. Absolutely. So the hypothesis that it was drugs that was linking the two together from that blood test result, I think that we were absolutely starting to tip the balance towards the second hypothesis.
And this is on the early morning of the 3rd,
Yes.
after your police colleagues have been contacted about their welfare.
Yes.
Why did it take until 21:44 on the 3rd to notify the ambulance service of the police belief now that the likely hypothesis was Novichok, and to give them notification for their staff who had attended on Charlie?
I can't answer that, I'm afraid. I don't know.
Given what you knew, the press release that went out on the 2nd,
Yes.
what time did that go out? Can you help us with that?
I don't know.
Because in that, of course, what you authorised is a statement to the public, and the ambulance service, obviously by dint of that, that there is nothing to suggest there is a wider risk to the public here. Why did that press release go out on the 2nd, given what you knew and your concern about your police staff?
Because at that point, that was the position that we were in at that point.
That there was nothing to suggest a wider risk to the public. That's
It
what
was
you
not,
said in the
we
press
were at that point, we were not in a position to alert the public to the second hypothesis or to consider the second hypothesis within the public domain.
Why was it necessary to positively assert in the press release that there was no risk when you did have the hypothesis in mind? You could have been silent.
I have no real explanation for that. It was not something that I actively considered at the time. We just wanted to ensure that when we were putting out this press release to the public, we were focused on the drug using community. We were not trying to panic or give any indication to the public there was anything to be concerned about at that point.
So that press briefing, which is inquiry 4568, you knew was wrong, but it still was put out.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That is not what I'm saying.
Still can't understand the positive assertion of no risk. Why was that necessary?
This press release was focused on hypothesis 1. It was focused on the drug using community within Salisbury. And the press release went out with absolutely the intention for public safety to warn other drug users of the concern within our community and to protect the public, regardless of that last sentence, which was absolutely at that time that was the primary hypothesis. We weren't overly concerned. We were exploring the secondary hypothesis. But at that point, that press release was entirely focused on the primary hypothesis, the main hypothesis, that it was a drug overdose with a pesticide poisoning, and there was a concern for other drug users within the community.
When you look at it now,
I have no further comment on it.
and the wording that there's nothing to suggest there is any risk to the wider public,
I have no further comment
was
on it.
that ill-advised words?
I have no further comment on it.
Was that ill-advised words?
No, Mr. Dolan, it's no good just asking time after time after time. You've got the answer such as it is. The rest is for me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
So I think that is indeed all the questions we have for this witness.
So be it. All right, Ms. Martin, thank you very much indeed
Thank you.
for coming. There's no need to stay unless you want to, but of course you can listen from elsewhere if you do want to.
Thank you very much.
Where are we going next, Mr. O'Connor?
So I think that will be a convenient moment to break for lunch.
Yes?
After lunch, we will resume with Dr. Dukes, and that will be level 2.
Right. So electronic devices, please, not in the room at quarter to 2, please. Thank you very much.